I dropped my wife Beatrice off at the departure terminal of O'Hare International Airport, under a sky that was as gray and heavy as lead. She leaned across the center console of my vintage Jaguar, the leather creaking softly under her weight, and pressed a kiss to my cheek that lingered just a second too long. It was the kind of kiss that felt more like a seal on an envelope than an expression of affection. Her perfume, a cloying floral scent that cost more per ounce than most people earned in a week, filled the car interior. "Garrison, my love, don't wait up for me," she said, her voice smooth like polished glass. "The conference in Paris is going to be exhausting, but I will video call you as soon as I get to the hotel. Take your medicine, and please drink your warm milk tonight. You know how much I worry about your heart." At 71, people expected me to be slowing down to be the retired real estate mogul whose sharp edges had been dulled by luxury and age. I played the part well. I let my hand tremble slightly as I touched hers. "I will, Beatrice," I rasped. "Have a safe flight. Call me when you land." She smiled, a dazzling display of white veneers that I had paid for, grabbed her Louis Vuitton carry-on, and stepped out into the biting Chicago wind. I watched her walk through the sliding glass doors, her hips swaying in that red trench coat, commanding attention from every man in the vicinity. She didn't look back once, not a single glance over her shoulder at her husband of 10 years, or her stepson sitting quietly in the back seat. I shifted the car into drive, letting out a breath I didn't know I had. He was small for 8 years old, with big observant eyes that saw too much and a mouth that rarely spoke. He had been unusually quiet all morning, clutching his backpack to his chest like a shield. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. His face was pale, his eyes wide and fixed on the terminal doors where Beatrice had just vanished. "We are going to get some ice cream before we head home, Leo," I said, trying to inject some warmth into the cold morning. "A treat for us men while Beatrice is away." Leo didn't smile. He didn't cheer. Instead, he leaned forward as far as the seatbelt would allow, his knuckles white as he gripped the front headrest. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling so much it barely carried over the hum of the engine. "We can't go home." I frowned, glancing at the traffic merging onto the freeway. "What do you mean, son?" "Are you feeling sick?" "No, Dad," he said. "We can't go home tonight. I heard Mom talking on the phone when she thought I was asleep. She isn't going to Paris. She said the doctor is coming to the house tonight." I chuckled dryly, though a seed of unease planted itself in my gut. "Leo, honey, Mom is flying to France. We just dropped her off, and we don't have any doctor appointments. She said the doctor is coming to give you a shot." Leo continued, tears now spilling onto his cheeks. "She said he is going to give you a shot so you will sleep forever. She said tonight is the night the old man finally stops breathing." I slammed on the brakes, tires screeched against the asphalt, and the driver behind me blared his horn, swerving to avoid a collision. I pulled onto the shoulder of the highway, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from my heart condition, but from the sudden icy clarity that washed over me. He didn't make up stories. If he said he heard something, he heard it. And the specific phrasing "sleep forever" was not the language of a child's imagination. It was a direct quote. "Are you sure, Leo?" I asked, turning in my seat to look him directly in the eyes. "I need you to be absolutely sure." "I am sure, Dad," he sobbed. She was laughing. She said she was tired of waiting. "Please don't go home." I stared at my son, and in that moment the facade of the frail old man dropped. The Garrison who had built an industrial empire from the dirt up, who had survived boardroom wars and a bullet to the shoulder in 1989, resurfaced. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It had been 10 minutes since Beatrice entered the terminal. If she was going to Paris, she would be at the security checkpoint by now. If she wasn't. Instead, I merged back into traffic and took the exit for the old service road that wound up the hill overlooking our property. It was a vantage point I used years ago to survey the land before I built the mansion. A habit of a developer: always look at your territory from above. "Dad, where are we going?" Leo asked, his voice small. "We are going to play a game, Leo," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming the cold steel tone I used when closing a hostile takeover. "We are going to play spy." I drove the Jaguar up the winding dirt path, the suspension groaning in protest. I killed the headlights as we reached the crest of the hill. Below us, nestled among 5 acres of manicured oak trees, sat my home. It was a sprawling Georgian estate, dark and imposing in the twilight. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a pair of high-powered binoculars, standard equipment for a man who spent his life inspecting construction sites. I lifted the binoculars to my eyes. The house was dark. The security lights hadn't triggered yet. I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Then I saw headlights. A black Audi R8, sleek and aggressive, turned into our long driveway. I didn't recognize the car. It wasn't one of ours. It slowed down as it approached the main gate. The driver didn't buzz the intercom. He didn't wait for someone to open it. The gate simply swung open. He had a remote. My grip on the binoculars tightened until my knuckles cracked. Only 3 people had a remote to that gate. Me, Beatrice, and the head of our security company. The Audi rolled up the driveway and stopped right in front of the main entrance. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, built like a tank, wearing the man who came to our house 3 times a week, who called me sir with a respectful nod, who helped me stretch my aging limbs. He walked up to the front door. He didn't knock. He pulled a key from his pocket, a key I never gave him, and unlocked my front door. I felt a bile rise in my throat. But the real blow was yet to come. 30 seconds later, the lights in the foyer flickered on. The front door opened again. Dominic stepped out, but he wasn't alone. Walking out of my garage, not from a taxi, not from an airport shuttle, but from the inside of my own home, was Beatrice. She wasn't wearing her travel clothes anymore. She was wearing a silk robe I had bought her for our anniversary, tied loosely around her waist. She walked up to Dominic, wrapped her arms around his neck, and kissed him. It wasn't they kissed right there on my front porch under the security cameras that she had likely disabled, thinking the old man was safely tucking himself into bed or driving aimlessly. Beatrice hadn't gone to Paris. She had sent me away to drop her off so she could circle back and prepare for my execution. I lowered the binoculars. My hands were steady now. The trembling was gone. The shock had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard fury that burned cleaner than gasoline. "You were right, Leo," I said softly. "We aren't going home." I started the car and reversed carefully down the hill, leaving the mansion and the adulterous murderers behind in the darkness. I didn't drive to the police station. The police would ask questions, they would file reports. We drove 20 miles south, away from the affluent suburbs, and into a part of the city that polite society pretended didn't exist. I pulled into the parking lot of a motel with a flickering neon sign that buzzed like an angry hornet. The Starlight Motel. It was a dump, the kind of place where people rented rooms by the hour, and questions were never asked. Leo looked at the peeling paint and the shady characters loitering by the vending machine. "Dad, this place looks scary." "It is safer than our house, son," I said, grabbing my laptop bag from the trunk. "Come on." I paid cash for a room at the back. It smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap disinfectant. I locked the door, engaged the deadbolt, and propped a chair under the handle, old habits from a life I thought I had left behind. He nodded, trusting me with the absolute faith of a child who had just saved his father's life. I sat at the small, scarred table and opened my laptop. Beatrice was smart, but she was arrogant. She thought I was a technophobe, a relic of the analog age who couldn't operate a microwave without help. She didn't know that the paranoia that helped me survive the cutthroat world of Chicago real estate in the 80s never truly went away. When we renovated the mansion 2 years ago, Beatrice hired a high-end security firm to install the main system. But I had hired a different contractor, a man who owed me a favor from a gambling debt, to install a secondary hardwired system. Pinhole cameras and high-fidelity microphones hidden in the molding of the library, the kitchen, and the master bedroom. It operated on an independent server. I logged in. The screen flickered to life. He had his boots up on the coffee table, my table. They were drinking a bottle of my 1982 Petrus. So did the old goat drink his cocktail? Dominic asked, swirling the wine in the glass. Beatrice laughed a sound that was sharp and cruel. I ground it into his protein shake this morning, and I put a double dose in the milk I prepared for him tonight. It is in the fridge. He is obsessed with that routine. He will come home, drink his milk, and go to bed. And then Dominic asked, and then around 3 a.m. his heart will just... Stop, Beatrice said, making an exploding motion with her hand. The beauty of digoxin, my love, is that it looks exactly like heart failure. He is 71. He has a history of high blood pressure. No one will even order an autopsy. The doctor I hired to sign the death certificate, my heart would flutter erratically after meals. I had mentioned it to Beatrice, and she had been so solicitous, insisting I see Dr. Sterling, a new concierge doctor she had found. Sterling had told me it was just anxiety and age. He had prescribed me supplements that Beatrice administered. I wasn't dying of old age. I was being poisoned. Slowly, systematically over weeks to build up the toxicity in my blood, preparing me for the final lethal dose tonight. If I had gone home, if I had drunk that milk, I would be dead before sunrise. I watched the screen. Dominic leaned over and kissed her neck. And the boy. What about Leo? Beatrice waved her hand dismissively. He is the only loose end. But don't worry, I have the papers drawn up. As soon as Garrison is in the ground, Leo goes to state care. He isn't my blood. I am not spending my inheritance raising another woman's brat. The rage was a physical thing, now a hot iron in my chest. She wasn't just killing me. She was discarding my son like garbage. I needed to know how much time I had. I needed to know how much poison was already in my veins. I stood up. Leo, let's go. Now, Dad, to see a real doctor. I drove us to an industrial park on the west side of the city. It was a maze of warehouses and auto body shops. Tucked in the back of a nondescript brick building was a private clinic run by Doc Thorne. Thorne was a former combat medic who had lost his license years ago for operating on gang members without reporting them to the police. He was discreet, he was brilliant, and he didn't ask questions. I banged on the metal door. A slot slid open, and a pair of eyes peered out. Garrison. The voice was rough, like gravel. You look like death warmed over. Open the door, Thorne. I explained the situation in 3 sentences. My wife is poisoning me. Digoxin. I need to know my levels. Thorne didn't blink. He drew blood immediately. He hooked me up to an EKG. While we waited for the rapid test results, he listened to my heart. Your rhythm is erratic, Garrison. You are throwing PVCs every 3rd beat. You are walking on a razor's edge. 20 minutes later, he came back with a printout. His face was grim. The toxic level for digoxin is anything over 2 nanograms per milliliter, he said, pointing to a red line on the chart. You are sitting at 3.5. I stared at the number. If you had drunk that milk tonight, Thorne said, looking me dead in the eye, your heart would have gone into ventricular fibrillation. You would have been dead in minutes. As it is, you are a ticking time bomb. I need to give you an antidote. As Thorne set up the IV, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked at the screen. It was Beatrice. My thumb hovered over the decline button. But if I didn't answer, she would get suspicious. If she suspected I wasn't coming home, she might run. Or worse, she might destroy the evidence in the house. I needed her to believe her plan was working. I needed her to feel safe. I gestured for silence. Leo watched me, his eyes wide. Thorne paused with the needle. I answered the phone, letting my voice sound weak and breathless, which wasn't hard given the state of my heart. "Hello, Beatrice Garrison?" "Darling," her voice came through the speaker, layered with fake concern and the background noise of an airport announcement. A recording, I realized now. "I just landed in Paris. It is chaotic here. I just wanted to make sure you are okay." "Did you get home safe?" "I am home," I lied, letting out a wheezing cough. "I am in the bedroom. I feel good." "That means you are relaxing," she cooed. "Did you drink your milk? I left it right at the front of the fridge." I took a sip, I said. It tasted a little bitter. "That is just the new protein powder, love. Drink it all. It will help you sleep. Please, for me. Drink the rest." "I will," I whispered. "I am going to drink it now. Then I am going to lie down." "Good night, Garrison. Sleep tight." The line went dead. I looked at Thorne. He shook his head in disgust. "That is cold. That is ice cold." I looked at the phone screen, now dark. She thinks I am in the bedroom. She thinks I am drinking the poison. She thinks she has won. Thorne pushed the antidote into my vein. The room spun. Nausea hit me like a wave. "We have 12 hours, I said, gripping the edge of the table. 12 hours before she... "I need to use your secure internet. I need to move some money before she realizes the accounts are still active." I sat up, fighting the drugs coursing through my system. I opened my laptop again. It was time to follow the money. I logged into our joint account at Chase. It was the account where I kept my liquid assets, about $5 million intended for our retirement, and Leo's trust fund. The balance read 0. I stared at the screen. 0. She hadn't waited for me to die. She had drained it today. I clicked on the transaction history. A wire transfer initiated at 9:00 a.m. this morning. $5 million sent to an entity called New Horizons LLC based in the Cayman Islands. I ran a search on New Horizons LLC using a private database I still had access to from my developer days. It took 10 minutes to crack the shell company. The registered agent wasn't Beatrice. It was Dominic. She thought they were partners. She didn't realize that in the world of grifters there are no partners, only victims in waiting. But she had made a mistake. A fatal mistake. Because I was Garrison. And I didn't keep my real wealth in a joint account with a woman I met at a charity gala 10 years ago. The $5 million was bait. It was the allowance account. I logged into my secure Swiss portal. My real assets, the $60 million from the sale of my commercial empire, were sitting untouchable in a trust that Beatrice didn't even know the name of. However, the theft of the $5 million gave me exactly what I needed: a felony. Wire fraud. Grand larceny. But money wasn't enough. I needed to destroy her completely. I needed to ensure she rotted in a cell for the rest of her life. Leo tugged on my sleeve. "Dad, look at this." He handed me. Mom was talking to a man in a suit. I pressed play. The video was shaky, taken from under a blanket. It showed Beatrice sitting at the kitchen table with a man I recognized, Blackwood. Not my Blackwood, but his nephew, a slimy lawyer who had been disbarred twice. "This is the petition for emergency cremation," the lawyer was saying. "We file this the moment the death is confirmed. We cite his history of heart disease. No autopsy. Straight to the incinerator. By the time anyone asks questions, he will be ash." Beatrice signed the paper with a flourish. "And the boy?" The lawyer smirked. "The orphanage in Gary is expecting him. They are paid to lose paperwork. He will disappear into the system." I stopped the video. My hands were shaking again. "But can you help me make a phone call?" "Who are we calling?" "The only man in this city who hates Beatrice almost as much as I do right now." My lawyer. The real Blackwood. I dialed the number. It was late, but Blackwood answered on the first ring. "Garrison." Is everything all right? No, Arthur. I am currently sitting in a back alley clinic with lethal levels of digoxin in my blood. My wife has stolen $5 million, and she is planning to cremate me tomorrow morning. There was a silence on the line, then the sound of a chair scraping and keys jingling. I am listening. I need you to prepare a team, Arthur. I need a forensic team, a makeup artist, and the sheriff. The sheriff, why? Because, I said, looking at my reflection in the dark, and tomorrow, Beatrice is going to have a front row seat to her own funeral. Let's get to work. We spent the next 3 hours in that clinic formulating the most dangerous con of my life. Thorne monitored my vitals. The antidote was working, bringing my heart rate down from the critical zone but leaving me exhausted and gray-skinned. Perfect for what came next. Arthur Blackwood arrived at the clinic at 1:00 a.m. He brought with him a man named Miller, a former special effects artist for horror movies, who now did reconstructive work for open-casket funerals. "This is insane," Garrison Blackwood said, looking at the IV in my arm. "If this goes wrong, if she checks your pulse properly—" "She won't," I said. "She is squeamish. She wants me dead, but she doesn't want to touch the body. She will look from the doorway, see the pallor, see the stillness, and she will call 911 to put on her show." He began to apply a layer of translucent silicone to my face, highlighting the cheekbones, adding a blue tint to my lips, creating the sunken, waxy look of a corpse. Thorne handed me a syringe. "This is a beta-blocker cocktail," he said. "It will drop your heart rate to about 30 beats a minute. Your breathing will be so shallow it will be invisible to the naked eye. You will feel cold to the touch, but you have to stay perfectly still. You can't flinch." "I understand." We left Leo with Blackwood's wife, a woman who baked cookies and asked no questions. Leaving him was the hardest part. "Dad, please come back," he whispered, hugging my waist. "I promise, Leo. When you see me next, the bad people will be gone." I drove back to the mansion at 3:30 a.m. I parked the Jaguar down the road and walked through the woods, avoiding the main gate. I used the 2 distinct rhythms. Beatrice and Dominic were asleep in my bed. I moved to the guest room, the room where I had been sleeping lately due to my illness. I set the stage. I knocked over the glass of milk on the nightstand, spilling a bit on the rug, to make it look like it fell from a lifeless hand. I injected the beta blocker. Within minutes, the cold spread through my limbs. My heart slowed. Thump, thump, thump. I lay back on the pillows, opened my mouth slightly, and fixed my eyes on a spot on the ceiling. I willed my body to become stone. I waited. The sun began to rise, casting long, pale shadows across the room. At 8 a.m., I heard the front door open downstairs. Beatrice's voice rang out loud and theatrical. "Garrison, honey. I am home. I caught an early flight back." Footsteps on the stairs. Fast, eager. She burst into the room, "Garrison." She stopped at the foot of the bed. She saw my gray skin, my blue lips, my unseeing eyes. For a second there was silence. Then she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She smiled. It was a small, tight smile of absolute victory. She leaned over me, her face inches from mine. I could smell the coffee on her breath. She didn't check for a pulse. She just poked my shoulder with one manicured finger. "Ding dong, the witch is dead," she whispered. Then she straightened up, took a deep breath, and let out a blood-curdling scream. "No, Garrison, wake up! Help someone, help me!" It was an Oscar-worthy performance. She pulled her phone out and dialed 911, sobbing hysterically into the receiver. "My husband, I think he is dead. He isn't breathing. Please hurry." She hung up the phone and immediately texted someone. I couldn't see the screen, but I knew who it was. "Dominic, it is done." 10 minutes. These were the private ambulance crew Blackwood had contracted, uniformed and driving a rig that looked exactly like the city's fleet. They burst into the room. One of them checked my neck. He pressed his fingers against my carotid artery, feeling the slow, faint thrum that Beatrice had missed. He looked at Beatrice, shaking his head. "I am sorry, ma'am. He is gone." Beatrice collapsed onto the floor, wailing. While she was putting on her show, the paramedics loaded me onto the gurney. They covered my face with the sheet. As they wheeled me out, I heard Beatrice's voice shift instantly from sobbing to businesslike. "Take him to the crematorium. I want it done today." It is what he wanted. We rolled past Dominic, who was standing in the hallway looking solemn. He gave Beatrice a subtle thumbs up. I was loaded into the back of the ambulance. "Vance, take me to the safe house," I said, wiping the makeup from my face. "We have a funeral to prepare." 3 days later, the living room of my mansion was transformed into a funeral parlor. Black velvet drapes covered the windows. Lilies, my most hated flower, filled every corner, their scent choking the air. Beatrice had organized a private viewing for close friends and business associates before the cremation. A closed casket, of course. I watched from the hidden panic room in the basement. The wall of monitors showed every angle of the living room. Beatrice stood by the mahogany casket. She was wearing a black dress that was tasteful but cut low enough to show off the diamond necklace she had bought with my stolen money. She was holding a tissue to her dry eyes, accepting condolences. Dominic stood near the bar pouring drinks, acting the part of the supportive friend. The room was full. My lawyer Blackwood was there. The sheriff was there in plain clothes. And importantly, my business partners were there. It was time. Beatrice tapped a spoon against a glass. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice trembling perfectly. Garrison was a man of great vision. And though he left us suddenly, he made sure everything was in order. He wanted this to be quick. He wanted no fuss. So we will be reading his last will and testament right now as per his final wishes before we say our last goodbye. She gestured to Blackwood. Blackwood stepped forward holding a thick envelope. He looked at Beatrice with a strange expression. "Actually, Mrs. Vance Blackwood," said, his voice carrying across. "What do you mean, I mean?" Blackwood continued, opening the envelope. "That this is the living will and testament of Garrison Vance, dated 4 days ago." Beatrice laughed nervously. "That is impossible. He was incapacitated 4 days ago." "Was he?" Blackwood asked. He pulled a remote control from his pocket and pointed it at the massive 85-inch television mounted above the fireplace, the television Beatrice usually used to watch reality shows. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a legal document. It was a video feed. A live video feed. From the basement. The camera zoomed in on a chair. Sitting in that chair, wearing a white tuxedo and holding a glass of milk, was me. I looked directly into the camera lens. "Hello, Beatrice," I said. The room erupted. People gasped. Someone dropped a glass. Beatrice spun around, looking at the TV. "This milk tastes a little bitter, darling," I said through the speakers. "Did you put extra love in it?" Beatrice backed away. "No. No. You are dead. I saw you dead." I stood up in the video. "I am very hard to kill, Beatrice. You should know that." I walked out of the frame. In the living room, all eyes turned to the basement door at the far end of the hall. The door handle turned. I stepped out. I walked into my living room, alive, furious, and very much in charge. The silence was absolute. Dominic tried to run for the patio door. The sheriff stepped in his path, flashing his badge. "Nowhere to go, son." I walked straight up to Beatrice. She was trembling so hard her diamond necklace rattled. "You," she stammered. How I ignored her. I turned to the room full of guests. "My wife," I announced, my voice booming, "tried to poison me with digoxin. She stole $5 million from our joint account." Beatrice shrieked, finding her voice. "He is senile. He has dementia. He doesn't know what he is saying." I pulled a folder from my jacket. Here are the toxicology reports from 3 days ago. Lethal levels of digoxin. Here is the video of you and Dominic in this very room discussing how to kill me. And here, I threw a stack of papers at her feet. Here is the transfer record of the $5 million to the Cayman Islands. I turned to Dominic. And you, Dominic. You really should have checked who owned the shell company in the Caymans before you accepted the transfer. Dominic looked confused. What New Horizons LLC? I said, smiling coldly. It is a subsidiary of Vance Global. You didn't steal my money, Beatrice. You just moved it from my left pocket to my right pocket. But in doing so, you committed wire fraud. Beatrice looked at Dominic. They turned on each other instantly, like rats in a bucket. It was her idea to use the poison, Dominic yelled. She bought it online. He is lying, Beatrice screamed, clawing at him. He forced me. He said he would hurt me if I didn't help him. Enough, the sheriff said. 2 deputies stepped forward, handcuffs clicking. Beatrice looked at me as they cuffed her. Her eyes were wild, desperate. Garrison, please. I love you. It was a mistake. We can fix this. I am your wife. I leaned in close so only she could hear. You are not my wife, Beatrice. You are a bad investment, and I am liquidating my assets. I nodded to the deputies. Get them out of my house. As they dragged them away, screaming and cursing, I looked at the casket. Blackwood walked over. What do we do with this? He asked, tapping the wood. I opened the lid. It was empty. Leo was there, waiting in Blackwood's car. I opened the door and scooped him up. He buried his face in my neck. Is it over, Dad? It is over, Leo. We are safe. I looked out over my estate. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the trees. I was 71 years old. I had been poisoned, betrayed, and declared dead. But as I held my son, I felt more alive than I had in 20 years. I took the plane tickets from my pocket. How do you feel about Hawaii, Leo? He smiled. I think I would like that. Me too, son. Me too. I sat up on the thin mattress of the clinic bed, the springs groaning under my weight as the room spun in a sickening tilt. The antidote Thorne had pumped into my veins was doing its job, neutralizing the digoxin, but it left me feeling hollowed out, as if my bones had been replaced with lead pipes. My chest still ached with a phantom pressure, but I could not afford to rest. I could not afford the luxury of convalescence. The clock on the wall ticked with a rhythmic, mocking precision, marking the hours until sunrise. The hours until my wife expected to find a corpse in our master bedroom. I needed to know the extent of the damage. I needed to know if I was just a dead man walking or a destitute one as well. I reached for my battered leather satchel, the one item Beatrice had always turned her nose up at, calling it a relic of a bygone era. She didn't know that inside this relic was a laptop that hadn't connected to our home Wi-Fi network in 5 years. It was a rugged military-grade machine, heavy and ugly, bought from a surplus auction. It had no tracking software, no cloud syncs, and absolutely no connection to the sleek, compromised devices Beatrice monitored. I opened the lid. The screen flickered to life with a harsh blue glow. My fingers, still trembling slightly from the chemical war raging in my blood, hovered over the keyboard. I typed in a passphrase that was 30 characters long, a string of nonsense that unlocked my digital fortress. First, I navigated to the portal for Chase Bank. This was the primary joint account, the reservoir for our liquid assets. It held the funds from the sale of my last commercial development in Seattle, a nest egg of $5 million that was supposed to be the cushion for my retirement, and more importantly, the foundation of Leo's future. It was the money Beatrice could see, the money she could touch, the money that made her feel like the queen of Lake Forest. I hit enter. The page loaded with agonizing slowness, the spinning wheel acting like a hypnotic pendulum. When the dashboard finally populated, I felt the air leave my lungs, as if I had been punched in the solar plexus. A perfect round, terrifying 0. I stared at the screen blinking, hoping it was a glitch, a loading error, a hallucination brought on by the toxicity in my blood. I refreshed the page. The zero remained stark and unyielding. I clicked on the transaction history, my heart hammering against my ribs in a dangerous, erratic rhythm. There it was. A single wire transfer initiated at 9:15 this morning, while I was driving back from the airport, while I was comforting Leo, while I was looking through binoculars at my wife kissing another man. She hadn't even waited for me to die. She had drained the account the moment she knew I was out of the house. $5 million. Gone in a keystroke. The beneficiary was listed simply as New Horizons Global. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. New Horizons Global. It sounded generic. I knew how to hide money. And more importantly, I knew how to find it when others tried to hide it from me. I opened a new window and accessed a private database, a legacy tool from my days as a developer. It was a gray market registry used by investigators and corporate spies to peel back the layers of shell companies. It cost a fortune to maintain access, a yearly fee I paid in cryptocurrency, but tonight it was worth every penny. I typed in New Horizons Global. The search bar pulsed. No results in the United States. No results in Europe. I expanded the search to offshore jurisdictions. Panama, the British Virgin Islands, the Seychelles. Nothing. I rubbed my eyes, frustration rising like bile. Beatrice was not a financial genius. She was a socialite who struggled to tip waitstaff correctly. She didn't build this structure. Someone else did. There was a sharpness there, a predator's calculation that didn't fit with counting reps and mixing protein shakes. I typed in the Cayman Islands registry. It was a long shot. The Caymans were notoriously opaque. But if they had been sloppy, if they had rushed it, bingo. New Horizons Global LLC, incorporated 2 weeks ago. Registered Agent A law firm in Georgetown. But the managing member, the signatory on the incorporation documents, was right there in black and white. Dominic Russo. I sat back in the chair, a dry, humorless laugh escaping my lips. It wasn't just theft. It was a transfer of power. Beatrice hadn't just stolen my money. She had handed it over to her lover. She had emptied our life savings and wired it directly into the pocket of the man she was sleeping with. The audacity was breathtaking. She didn't realize that in the world of high-stakes theft, there are no partners. There are only sharks and the chum they leave behind. Dominic now held the keys to the kingdom. If Beatrice annoyed him, if she became a liability, he could disappear with my money, and she would be left with nothing but a dead husband and a prison sentence. But that thought gave me no comfort, because right now I was the one with nothing. I looked over at Leo sleeping fitfully on 2 chairs I had pushed together. He looked so small, so fragile. That $5 million was his trust fund. It was his college tuition. It was his safety net. And I had let it slip away because I was too busy playing the role of the frail old man, too busy letting Beatrice think she was winning so I could catch her in a lie. I had caught the lie, but the price had been everything I had immediate access to. I checked my other domestic accounts, the checking account, the overdrawn. She had been thorough. She had scrubbed me clean. She had left me with less than nothing. She wanted to ensure that even if I somehow survived the poison, I would be destitute. I wouldn't have the resources to hire a lawyer. I wouldn't have the money to fight her. She wanted me powerless. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the medicine. I felt exposed, naked. For the first time in 50 years, I was technically broke. I had cash in my wallet, maybe $400. I had the car. And I had a sick heart. The realization was heavy, a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. I was a tycoon, a titan of industry, a man who had reshaped the skyline of Chicago. And now I was hiding in a back alley clinic, stripped of my fortune by a woman I had bought jewelry for a woman. They thought they had won because they took the liquid cash. They thought 5 million was a fortune. They thought that was the extent of my empire. They didn't know about the Zurich Trust. They didn't know that the 5 million in Chase was just the operating capital, the decoy money I kept on shore for appearances. They didn't know that my real wealth, the $60 million from the sale of my logistics company 10 years ago, was sitting in a blind trust in Switzerland that required biometric authentication to access. Beatrice didn't even know the name of the bank. However, accessing that money would take time. It would take verification. It would take physical presence or a lawyer's intervention. I couldn't touch it tonight. I couldn't use it to buy my safety right now. For the next 12 hours, I was exactly what they wanted me to. They had taken my home. They had taken my trust. But they had made a critical error. By moving the money across international borders, by using wire transfers to a shell company, they hadn't just committed theft. They had committed wire fraud, money laundering, federal crimes. They had handed me a weapon. I looked at the empty IV bag hanging above me. My strength was returning, slowly creeping back into my muscles. The digoxin was fading. My heart beat steady and strong. "You want my money, Dominic," I whispered to the empty room. "You can keep it for now. Hold on to it tight. Because when I come for you, I am not going to sue you. I am going to bury you under the weight of the federal government." I stood up and walked over to Leo. I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "I am sorry, son," I murmured. I walked back to the table and picked up my phone. It was time to make the call that would set the stage for my resurrection. I needed cash, I needed resources, and I needed them off the books. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang once, twice. Blackwood. A voice answered, rough with sleep. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady. "Wake up. We have a funeral to plan. And I need to know if you still have that friend in the forensic accounting division of the FBI." There was a pause. "Garrison, it is 3 a.m. "I know," I said. "And by noon tomorrow I am going to be dead. So listen carefully, because I don't have much time, and I currently have $0 to pay your retainer." I heard the rustle of sheets, the click of a lamp turning on. "Talk to me, Garrison." My wife I closed the laptop, the screen fading to black, but the image of that zero balance was seared into my mind. $5 million. Gone. It was a staggering blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. But as I sat there in the dim light of the clinic, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound, I reminded myself of a fundamental truth: money is renewable. I had made it before I could make it again. I could rebuild. I could claw my way back from bankruptcy if I had to. What I couldn't replace, what no amount of gold or stocks could ever buy back, was the time I had spent sleeping next to a viper. I felt a small, tentative hand on my arm. I turned, startled from my dark reverie. Leo was standing there, his face pale in the harsh fluorescent light. He was holding his iPad, clutching it to his chest like a lifeline. His knuckles were white. I frowned, a new wave of dread washing over me. "What is it, Leo?" He handed me the tablet. My hands were still shaking, the aftershocks of the antidote warring with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I took the device and looked at the screen. It was a video file paused on a frame of our kitchen. I pressed play. The video was grainy, shot from a low angle, likely from behind the kitchen island, or under the breakfast table. It was the perspective of a child hiding a spy in his own home. The audio was muffled at first, then cleared as the camera focused. There was Beatrice. She was sitting at the granite island, the very place where we had shared breakfast just this morning. But this wasn't the woman who buttered my toast and kissed my cheek. This was a stranger. Her face was hard, her eyes cold and calculating. She was smoking a cigarette, a habit she swore. He was oily, wearing a cheap suit that fit poorly, his briefcase open on the counter. He looked like the kind of lawyer who chased ambulances, the kind who operated out of a strip mall and accepted cash in envelopes. The paperwork is ready, the man said, sliding a thick document across the granite. The transfer of guardianship is effective immediately upon the death of the primary caregiver. Since you are the stepmother, and there are no other living relatives listed, you have the legal right to waive custody to the state. Beatrice laughed. It was a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was devoid of warmth, devoid of humanity. Waive custody. That sounds so passive, Miller. I want to erase him. I want him gone. The moment Garrison's heart stops beating, that boy becomes a ward of the state. I have already arranged for the pickup. The St. Mary's home in Gary. I paused the video. The air left the room sucked out by the sheer gravity of her malice. St. Mary's in Gary. I knew of it. It was a warehouse for unwanted children, a place notorious for neglect, for abuse, for turning broken children into hardened criminals. It was a hellhole, and she was sending my son there. Leo. My Leo. He wasn't Beatrice's son. She made sure everyone forgot that when it suited her, playing the role of the devoted mother in public. But in private, in the dark corners of her heart, she remembered. My first wife, Sarah, had died giving birth to him. Leo was the last piece of her I had left, the living embodiment of a love that had been pure and true. When I met Beatrice, I was a grieving widower, a man drowning in sorrow, and he needs a mother, she had said. Her eyes shining with unshed tears on our third date. And I have so much love to give. I believed her. God help me, I believed her. I thought I was giving him a mother. Instead, I had invited a monster into his nursery. I had placed a wolf to guard the lamb. I forced myself to press play again. I needed to see it all. I needed to drink this poison to the dregs. Beatrice was signing the papers now, her pen scratching loudly in the silence of the kitchen. She stopped to take a drag of her cigarette, blowing a plume of smoke into the air where my son usually ate his cereal. He looks too much like his father, she spat, her lip curling in disgust. And he has his mother's weak chin. I am sick of looking at him. I am sick of pretending to care about his liquidated, she said, tapping the ash from her cigarette onto my countertop, my home, my sanctuary. It reverts to the estate upon his remand to state care. And since I am the sole beneficiary of the estate, cha-ching. She smiled, a predatory, triumphant smile. I looked up from the screen. Leo was sitting on the edge of the clinic bed, his legs swinging nervously, his eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. He looked so small, so incredibly alone. Suddenly the memories flooded back. Not the happy, curated memories I had constructed to convince myself I had a good life, but the real ones. The fragments I had ignored. The time Leo fell down the stairs and broke his arm when he was 5. Beatrice had been so distraught, crying harder than he was claiming, she had turned her back for just a second. I had comforted her. The child psychologist Beatrice hired a friend of hers, said it was a phase, a cry for attention, a sign of developmental delay. The way Leo would flinch whenever she moved too fast. The way he would go silent, shrinking into himself the moment she walked into a room. It wasn't shyness. It wasn't a phase. It wasn't a delay. It was terror. He had been living in a war zone. My house was a battlefield, and I had been sleeping through the bombardment. I had been so busy building my empire, so busy playing the retired tycoon, so busy enjoying the comfort of a young, beautiful wife that I hadn't noticed my own son was a prisoner of war in his own home. Leo, I choked out, my voice thick with emotion. How long has she been like this? He shrugged, a small, heartbreaking motion that spoke volumes of his resignation. Always, Dad. When you aren't there. She says I am a liar, and that you only keep me around because you feel sorry for me because Mom died. Tears, hot and stinging, pricked my eyes. I reached out and pulled him into my arms, burying my face in his small shoulder. He felt so fragile against my chest, his heart beating a rapid rhythm against mine. She lied, I whispered fiercely into his hair. She lied about everything. You are not a liar. You are my son. You are the most important thing in this world to me. More important than the money. More important than the house. More important than my own life. I pulled back to look at him, gripping his shoulders. I am so sorry, Leo. I am so sorry I didn't see it, but I see it now. I looked back at the frozen image of Beatrice on the iPad. Her face was twisted in a sneer I had never seen directed at me, but one my son had clearly seen every day of his life. She was stealing his future. She was selling him like livestock to a state institution known for abuse and neglect, just to add a few more zeros to her bank account. She didn't just want me dead. She wanted my legacy erased. She wanted to scrub the earth of any trace that Garrison Vance had ever existed. A cold fury settled over me, heavier and darker than the anger I felt about the $5 million. The money was just paper. This was a violation of the sacred. She had hurt my cub, and for that there would be no mercy. There would be no plea bargains. There would be no prison sentence long enough to satisfy the debt she now owed. I wanted to destroy her. I wanted to strip her of everything she held dear, her status, her beauty, her freedom, and leave her with nothing but the ash. Listen to me, I said to Leo, my voice steady and low, vibrating with a promise that felt forged in iron. You are never going to that place. You are never going back to her. We are going to fix this, tonight. But she has the papers, Leo whispered, his eyes wide with fear. She signed them. She said it's the law. Papers are just paper, I said, standing up. And I am going to burn them. I am going to burn her whole world down. I felt the weakness in my legs fade, replaced by a surge of strength I hadn't felt in decades. The digoxin might still be in my system trying to stop my heart, but the adrenaline of a father protecting his child was a more potent drug than anything Beatrice could concoct. I looked at the time on the clinic wall. We had hours before sunrise, hours to turn the tables, hours to write the script for the final act. The financial trap was set. The forensic accountants would have a field day with the Cayman transfer. But now I needed something more visceral. I needed to ensure that when she fell hard. I needed to ensure she felt the ground rush up to meet her. I needed to set the stage for my death. If she wanted a tragedy, I would give her a Shakespearean ending. I looked around the empty clinic room, the flickering fluorescent light, the peeling paint, the smell of antiseptic and desperation. It was a long way from the marble floors and crystal chandeliers of my mansion in Lake Forest. But it was here in this grime that I would reclaim my life. It was here that Garrison Vance would die so that he could be reborn as something far more dangerous. Leo, I said, grabbing my coat and swinging it over my shoulders. We need some supplies. If I'm going to be a ghost, I need to look the part. I took his hand. His grip was tight, trusting. He looked up at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw hope in his eyes. We walked out of the clinic into the cool night air. The city was sleeping, unaware of the drama unfolding in its shadows. Beatrice was probably sleeping too in my bed next to her lover, dreaming of her millions, dreaming of her freedom, dreaming of a life without the old man and his burden of a son. Let her sleep. Let her dream. Because when she woke up, she would be living in my nightmare. The wind picked up, rustling the trash in the alley. It felt like a change in the weather. A storm was coming, and I was bringing the thunder. The silent Leo was sitting on the edge of the bed, his small hand still gripping mine, but my mind was miles away, racing through the implications of what I had just seen. She was stealing my money. She was discarding my son. But there was one piece of the puzzle that still felt incomplete. Why tonight? Why the rush? Why the sudden, desperate acceleration of a plan that seemed to have been in the works for months? Digoxin is a slow killer if used correctly, mimicking a gradual decline. But she had ramped up the dosage to lethal levels in a single day. She wasn't just impatient. She was on a deadline. I needed the final piece of the puzzle. I needed to know how she planned to get away with murder in a city where I was a public figure. You don't just kill a man like Garrison Vance. It was time to call the only man who knew where all the bodies were buried, because he had helped me dig a few of the legal graves himself. Arthur Blackwood. Not the slimeball nephew Beatrice had been conspiring with in the video, but the uncle, the patriarch of the firm, my oldest friend and the fiercest litigator in Chicago. It was 3:15 in the morning. I dialed his private line. It rang 4 times. I could imagine him fumbling for his glasses on the nightstand, his gray hair mussed his sharp mind, waking up instantly. Vance, his voice was gravelly but alert. "Do you know what time it is? I am dying, Arthur," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Or at least I am supposed to be." There was a pause, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. "Explain." "Beatrice is poisoning me," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Digoxin. And she plans to send Leo to an orphanage in Gary." I heard the sound of feet hitting the floor, the rustle of a robe. "Stay where you are," Blackwood commanded. "I am calling the police commissioner." "No," I stopped him. "Not yet. If the police show up at the house now, she will play the grieving, confused wife. She will say I am senile, that I wandered off, that I am making up stories. She has spent months planting seeds about my mental health. She will claim the money transfer was for my care. She will claim the orphanage papers were just a contingency. We need more, Arthur. We need to know the endgame. I need you to check the county clerk's digital filings." I continued. "Check for any emergency petitions filed in my name or hers in the last 24 hours. You think she filed something? She is thorough, Arthur. She wouldn't kill me without a way." I heard the clatter of a keyboard. The seconds stretched out, agonizing and long. I looked at Thorne, who was watching me with a grim expression. He knew what I was looking for. We both did. "Found it," Blackwood said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Jesus, Garrison. Tell me." "It is a pre-filed request for an expedited cremation order," Blackwood said, the paper rustling on his end. "Filed yesterday afternoon by an attorney named Miller. It cites a religious objection to autopsies and a history of chronic cardiac failure. It is signed by you." I closed my eyes. I never signed that. "It is a forgery, obviously, but a good one," Blackwood said. "And there is a contract attached. With the Sunrise Crematorium." I knew the place. It was a budget operation on the South Side known for asking 0 questions, and they are going to burn the evidence. They are going to turn me into smoke before the sun sets tomorrow. That is why tonight, Blackwood realized. If you die tonight, the coroner picks you up in the morning. With this paperwork, you bypass the county morgue. You go straight to Sunrise. By noon, you are in an urn, and the digoxin is gone. Perfect crime. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the chill of being erased. Beatrice didn't just want my money. She wanted to obliterate my existence. She wanted to scrub me from the earth so thoroughly that there would be nothing left to prove I had ever been murdered. I looked at Leo. If I was Ash, who would protect him? If I was gone, his testimony would be dismissed as the confusion of a grieving child. Beatrice would win. She would. "You have to get to safety. We can fight this in court." "In court," I snapped. "While she drains the offshore trusts, while she flees the country, while she spins a narrative that I lost my mind and disappeared, no. If I run, I am just a fugitive husband. If I run, she has time to cover her tracks. She has time to destroy the poison, delete the files, pay off the witnesses. Then what are you going to do?" I looked at the reflection in the darkened window. The face looking back at me was pale, gaunt, haunted. It was the face of a dead man. "She wants a dead husband, Arthur," I said, a plan forming in the darkness of my mind. A plan so reckless, so dangerous, that it was the only thing that could possibly work. "I am going to give her one." Garrison, don't do anything stupid. I am done being smart, Arthur. Smart got me poisoned in my own kitchen. I am going to be a ghost. You know, the one who does the special effects makeup for the opera. And I need the sheriff. The real sheriff, not the deputies on Beatrice's payroll. You are going to fake your death, Blackwood asked, his voice rising in disbelief. That is insane. If she realizes you are alive— She won't, I said. She is arrogant. She expects to see a corpse. She expects to see what she wants to see. She won't check for a pulse because she is afraid of death. She is a coward. She will stand in the doorway and gloat. And then I said, my voice hardening into steel, I am going to let her plan my funeral. I am going to let her invite all our friends, all our business partners, all the people she wants to impress with her grief. I am going to let her stand up there and lie to the world. And when she thinks she has won, when she is reading— Then I heard a sound I hadn't heard from Arthur Blackwood in years. A low, dark chuckle. It is theatrical, Garrison. It is dramatic. It is completely unhinged. It is justice, I said. I will be there in 20 minutes, Blackwood said. And Garrison. Yeah, make sure you look dead, because if you blink, we are all going to jail. I hung up the phone. I looked at Thorne. Do you have anything that can slow my heart rate down? I asked. Way down, to the point where a paramedic might miss it if he wasn't looking closely. Thorne looked at me, his eyes wide. You want a beta blocker cocktail? It is dangerous, Garrison. With the digoxin already in your system, will it kill me? It might. It will drop your— I am just waiting for my body to catch up. I looked at Leo. He was watching me with terror in his eyes. Dad, what are you doing? I am going to play a trick on the bad people, Leo, I said, kneeling down to look him in the eye. A magic trick. I am going to go to sleep, and for a little while, everyone is going to think I am gone. But I promise you, I swear to you, on your mother's memory, I will wake up. He threw his arms around my neck. Don't go, I have to, son. It is the only way to catch them. It is the only way to make sure they never hurt us again. I held him tight, memorizing the feel of his small arms, the smell of his shampoo. This was the fuel I needed. This was the reason I would survive the poison, the drugs, and the cold, terrifying silence of playing dead. I stood up. I was ready. Beatrice wanted a tragedy. She wanted and when the curtain fell, she would be the one in the box. I drove the Jaguar through the sleeping streets of Chicago, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon against the rain-slicked asphalt. My hands on the leather steering wheel were steady now, the tremor gone, replaced by the cold mechanical precision of a man who had spent 40 years constructing skylines. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of my own demise, and I intended to build this death as carefully as I had built the Vance Tower. We arrived at Arthur Blackwood's private residence in the Gold Coast at 3:40 in the morning. It was a fortress of limestone and iron, a place where secrets came to be buried under non-disclosure agreements and expensive scotch. Arthur met us at the service entrance wearing a silk dressing gown over his suit trousers, a tumbler of amber liquid already in his hand. He didn't look like a man, he looked like a general surveying a battlefield. Inside, the library was already converted into a command center. Thorne, the combat medic, had come with us, carrying his black medical bag like a weapon. But there were others waiting. Arthur hadn't wasted a second. Standing by the fireplace was a man I knew only by reputation. Miller. He was a legend in certain circles, a former mortuary cosmetologist, who had pivoted to special effects for the film industry, before finding a more lucrative niche working for people like me, people who needed reality adjusted. He had a face that was entirely forgettable, the kind you would pass on the street without a second glance, but his hands were long, artistic, and stained with pigments. Next to him stood the sheriff, a man I had helped elect 3 terms ago with a substantial donation to his campaign fund. He nodded at me, a grim acknowledgement of the debt he was about to repay. You look like hell. I feel like it, I replied, walking to the center of the room. But I am not dead yet. That is the problem. We have a timeline to keep, Arthur said, gesturing to the group. If Beatrice expects a body by morning, we have approximately 3 hours to turn you into a corpse that can pass inspection. Miller, you are up. Miller stepped forward, opening a metal case that folded out into a terrifying array of brushes, silicones, and vials of fluid. He looked at me with the detached clinical gaze of a butcher eyeing a side of beef. The lighting in your bedroom, Miller asked, his voice soft and raspy. Is it warm or cool? LED or incandescent warm, I said. Bedside lamps, vintage bulbs. Good, Miller muttered. That gives us some latitude. Yellow light hides the imperfections in the skin tone. Sit down, Mr. Vance. He used translucent silicone gels, layering them over my skin to dull the natural reflectivity of living tissue. He worked on my cheeks, shading the hollows to make me look gaunt, dehydrated. He applied a subtle blue tint to my lips and nail beds, the telltale cyanosis of cardiac failure. While Miller painted death onto my face, Thorne and Arthur discussed the chemistry of my resurrection. The digoxin is already in his system, Thorne said, laying out a row of syringes on the mahogany desk. That provides the base irregularity. But to fool a paramedic, even a paid one, we need to drop the vitals to the floor. He held up a vial of clear liquid. This is a proprietary beta blocker cocktail usually used for slowing the heart during bypass surgery, Thorne explained. Combined with a heavy sedative, it is going to drop your heart rate to roughly 25 beats per minute. Your respiration will be so shallow it will be undetectable without a stethoscope placed directly on the chest. And the risk, I asked, not moving my lips, as Miller dabbed a gray wash onto my neck. Thorne paused. The risk is that your heart stops completely. You are 71, Garrison. Your system has already been stressed by the poison. We are essentially pushing the pause button on your biology. If you panic, if your adrenaline spikes while the blockers are active, you could go into cardiac arrest for real. You have to be zen. You have to be a stone. I looked at my reflection in the mirror Miller held up. The man staring back at me was already gone. His skin was waxy, his eyes sunken, his lips the color of a bruised plum. It was terrifying. It was a masterpiece. I can do it, I said. I have spent my life controlling chaos. I can control my own heartbeat. Arthur stepped forward. When she dials 911, it will ring on a burner phone in the van parked 2 streets over. My team will take the call. My team will arrive. And the coroner, I asked. The sheriff grunted from the corner. I have already signed the preliminary death certificate. Cause of death, myocardial infarction, secondary to chronic arrhythmia. No autopsy required. The body is released to the family for immediate cremation. It was seamless. It was the kind of bureaucratic magic that only money and power could buy. It was the exact same system Beatrice had tried to use against me, only now I was the one pulling the levers. I stood up. The silicone on my face felt tight, like a second skin shrinking as it dried. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Beatrice was sleeping. We need to stage the room. It needs to look like a struggle for breath, but not a struggle against an attacker. It needs to look like you died alone and afraid. I know exactly how to do that, I said. I have been practicing feeling alone for a long time. We left Leo at Arthur's house. His wife Martha had set up a bed for him in the guest room. I knelt down to say goodbye to my son. He looked at my face, at the makeup of death, and his lip trembled. It is just paint, Leo, I whispered, guiding his hand to touch my cheek. Like Halloween. You look scary, Dad. I have to be scary, son. Monsters are only afraid of bigger monsters. I hugged him tight, memorizing the smell of his hair, the warmth of his small body. I drove back to the estate in a nondescript van provided by the sheriff, parking it on the service road a mile from the main gate. I walked the rest of the way through the woods, the damp earth soaking my shoes. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and silent, a mausoleum of my own making. I entered through the servants' entrance, using the code Beatrice never bothered to change. The house was quiet, the air conditioning humming a low, steady note. I crept up the back stairs, my footsteps silent on the plush carpeting. I reached the guest bedroom. This was it, the stage. I set the scene with the meticulous eye of a set designer. I knocked over the water glass on the nightstand, letting the puddle soak into the rug. I pulled the sheets half off the mattress, as if I had thrashed in the night. I opened the bottle of nitroglycerin tablets Dr. Sterling had prescribed placebo. Then I sat on the edge of the bed. I took the syringe Thorne had given me. The needle was thin silver in the moonlight. This was the point of no return. Once I pushed the plunger, my body would shut down. I would be trapped in a chemical prison, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to defend myself. I would be entirely at the mercy of the woman who wanted me dead. I thought about the $5 million. I thought about the orphanage in Gary. I thought about Leo's face when he told me he couldn't go home. I didn't hesitate. I jammed the needle into my thigh and depressed the plunger. The effect was almost instantaneous. A cold heaviness spread from the injection site, moving up my torso like rising water. My fingers went numb. My eyelids felt like they were made of lead. I lay back on the pillows, arranging my limbs in a pose of exhaustion. I let my heart began to slow. Thump, pause, thump, pause, thump. The world began to gray out at the edges. The silence of the room grew louder, a roaring in my ears that slowly faded to a dull buzz. I was conscious but distant, as if I were floating above my own body. I couldn't feel the sheets against my skin. I couldn't feel the cold air. I was a statue. I was a corpse. I waited. Time lost its meaning. Minutes stretched into hours. I tracked the passage of time only by the slow movement of the moonlight across the floorboards. Then the sound. The front door opening downstairs. The click of heels on marble. Beatrice. She was home. I heard her humming. She was humming a tune, something light and airy. She was happy. She was coming to check her traps. Her footsteps came. I focused every ounce of my will on not blinking. I focused on the darkness behind my eyes. I was stone. I was ice. I was nothing. The door creaked open. Garrison. Her voice called out, laced with a mockery of concern. Honey, are you awake? She walked into the room. Her perfume hit me first, that expensive, cloying scent. She stopped at the foot of the bed. Silence. She was watching me. She was looking for the rise and fall of my chest. But thanks to Thorne's cocktail, there was none to see. She took a step closer, then another. I could feel her presence looming over me. She leaned down. Her breath smelling of coffee and mints washed over my face. She didn't touch me. She didn't check for a pulse. She just stared. And then she let out a long, slow exhale. Fine, get the paperwork ready. We are celebrating tonight. She hung up. Then she did something that seared itself into my soul, something that guaranteed I would destroy her without a shred of remorse. She laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It wasn't a relief laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated greed. She laughed over the body of the man she had married, the man she had promised to love and cherish. Then she began to scream. No, Garrison. Oh God, no! The performance had begun. She ran to the hallway shouting for the maid, who wasn't there, shouting for the world to hear her grief. I lay there in the cold silence of my own body, listening to her wails, and I felt a strange, dark satisfaction. Scream all you want. Beatrice, I thought, my mind sharp and clear inside my frozen shell. Scream loud, because this is the last time you will ever— The mouse had taken the cheese, and now the steel bar was coming down. I just had to stay dead for one more hour. Just one more hour. And then the resurrection would begin. I drove the nondescript van Arthur had procured for me, a rusted service vehicle that smelled of old paint and stale coffee, and parked it a mile down the service road. The rain had stopped, leaving the night air thick with the scent of wet pine and damp earth. I stepped out my dress shoes, sinking slightly into the mud. It was a fitting start to my funeral march. I left the vehicle, unlocked the keys under the mat, and began the trek through the woods that bordered my estate. I knew every root, every dip in the land. I had walked these woods when I bought the property 30 years ago, dreaming of the empire I would build. Now I was walking them to reclaim the ash. It looked peaceful, majestic, even with its slate roof and limestone walls. But to me it looked like a mausoleum, a tomb built for a living man. I reached the perimeter fence and punched the code into the service keypad. Beatrice had never bothered to learn the service codes. To her, the mechanics of the house were invisible, handled by the staff she treated with disdain. That arrogance was her weakness. I slipped inside the grounds, moving like a shadow across the manicured lawn. The security cameras tracked my movement, their red lights blinking, but I wasn't worried. The feed was being looped by Arthur's tech team. To anyone watching, the monitors inside the lawn was empty and still. I entered through the mudroom door, the hinges silent, thanks to the oil I applied religiously every spring. The house breathed around me, the familiar hum of the HVAC system, the settling of the— Above me on the second floor in the master suite that I had designed with a view of the lake, my wife was sleeping. And she wasn't alone. I could feel the presence of Dominic in the house, a stain on the atmosphere. The thought of him in my bed, his head on my pillows, sent a spike of adrenaline through me that threatened to override the residual weakness from the antidote. I forced it down. I pushed the rage into a cold, dark box in my mind. Anger was a luxury for the living. Tonight, I had to be dead. I crept up the stairs, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I bypassed the master suite and headed down the hall to the guest wing. This was where I had been exiled for the past month under the guise of my illness, keeping Beatrice awake. It was perfect, isolated, soundproof, a stage set for a tragedy. I entered the room and closed the door softly. I opened the black medical bag Arthur had given me. Inside were the tools of my transformation. I sat at the vanity table and looked at myself in the mirror. The face staring back was already gaunt, the stress of the last 12 hours having carved deep lines around my mouth and eyes. But it wasn't enough. I needed to look like a man whose heart had failed him, a man whose blood had stopped circulating hours ago. I opened the jar of silicone gel Miller had prepared. It was cool to the touch. I applied it to my skin, smoothing it over my cheeks and forehead. It dried quickly, tightening my skin, dulling the natural shine, giving me a waxy, translucent pallor. I took the small palette of pigments and dabbed a bruised purple under my eyes, sinking them into my skull. I applied a faint blue tint to my lips and fingernails, the cyanosis of oxygen deprivation. When I was finished, I stared into the mirror and felt— The man in the mirror was a corpse. It was a terrifying glimpse into my own mortality. A dress rehearsal for the inevitable. Now came the hardest part, the staging. I walked to the bed and pulled the covers back. I needed this to look real. It couldn't look peaceful. Death by cardiac arrest from digoxin toxicity was not gentle. It was a struggle. It was chaos. I messed up the sheets, twisting them as if I had thrashed in pain. I took the glass of water from the nightstand and tipped it over, letting the water soak into the expensive Persian rug. I opened the bottle of nitroglycerin pills, the placebo prescription Beatrice had insisted on, and scattered them across the floor as if I had fumbled for them in my final moments, desperate for salvation that never came. I took off my shoes and jacket, draping them carelessly over the chair. I loosened my tie but didn't remove it. I sat on the edge of the bed. I picked up the syringe Thorne had prepared. The beta-blocker cocktail. This was the cliff edge. Once I injected this, I was a passenger in my own body. My heart rate would drop to 30 beats per minute. My breathing would become so shallow it would be imperceptible to the naked eye. My body temperature would drop. I would be paralyzed, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to blink. If Beatrice decided to suffocate me with a pillow just to be sure I wouldn't be able to stop her. If she decided to start the cremation early, I would feel the heat but be unable to scream. It was madness. It was the only way. I thought of Leo sleeping safely at Arthur's house. I thought of the future I was fighting for. I rolled up my sleeve. I found a vein in my thigh, just as Thorne had instructed to hide the needle mark. I tossed the syringe under the bed where it wouldn't be easily seen. I lay back against the pillows. I arranged my limbs in a pose of final exhaustion, one arm dangling off the side of the bed, reaching toward the spilled pills. I opened my mouth slightly, letting my jaw go slack. I fixed my eyes on a spot on the ceiling, a water stain I had noticed years ago. I waited. The drug hit me like a physical weight. My limbs grew heavy, then numb. The sensation of the sheets against my skin faded. The cold crept inward, settling in my chest. My heart hammered once hard, as if protesting, and then it slowed. Thump. Silence. Thump. Silence. My breathing grew shallow. I didn't have to force it. My diaphragm simply lacked the energy to expand fully. I was taking tiny sips of air, just enough to keep the brain oxygenated, not enough to move my chest. My eyelids felt like lead curtains, but I forced them to stay half open, staring unseeingly at the ceiling. My vision blurred, the edges of the room darkening into a tunnel. I was locked in. I was a prisoner in a bone cage. I could hear. I could see, though, dimly. But I couldn't move a finger. I tried to twitch my toe, just to test the limits. Nothing. The signal from my brain went out into the void and died. Panic flared in my chest, a hot spark in the cold. What if Thorne was wrong? What if my heart stopped completely? What if I died here alone, looking like a fool in makeup? I forced my mind to focus. I counted the seconds between heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4. I was alive. I was a stone. I was the mountain. Time lost its meaning. The night stretched out vast and indifferent. I watched the moonlight crawl across the floorboards, a slow, silent clock. None of it mattered now. All that mattered was the woman sleeping down the hall, and the boy waiting for his father. Hours passed. The sky outside the window began to turn a bruised purple, then a pale, watery gray. Dawn. The birds started to sing. Their cheerful chirping felt obscene. Then I heard it, the sound of a door opening downstairs, the heavy thud of the front door, the click of heels on the marble foyer. Beatrice. She was home, or rather she was returning from her fake trip to the airport, playing the part of the weary traveler coming back to her husband. I heard her voice loud and projecting, performing for an audience of none. Garrison, honey, I managed to catch an earlier flight. The conference was a disaster. Her voice carried up the stairs, shrill and false. I heard her footsteps. They weren't the hurried steps of a worried. I could imagine her checking her reflection in the hallway mirror, fixing her hair, preparing her face for the scene she was about to act out. She walked down the hall. Garrison, are you awake? She bypassed the master bedroom. She knew I wasn't there. She came straight to the guest room. The doorknob turned. The brass mechanism clicked loudly in the silence. My heart wanted to race, wanted to pound against my ribs, but the drugs held it in a vice grip. Thump, 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 slow, agonizing. The door creaked open. Beatrice stood in the doorway. She was wearing the same red trench coat she had left in. She looked impeccable. She scanned the room. Her eyes landed on the bed, on me. She froze. For a long moment, there was no sound but the birds outside. She took a step into the room, then another. She saw the spilled water. She saw the scattered pills. She saw the gray, waxy pallor of my skin and the blue tinge of my lips. She approached the bed slowly, like a hunter approaching a trapped animal. She stopped 2 feet away. She leaned in her eyes, searching mine. I stared through her, focusing on the ceiling, willing my pupils not to react to her presence. She was close enough that I could smell the stale coffee on her breath and the underlying scent of Dominic's cologne on her clothes. She didn't reach out to touch me. She didn't check for a pulse. She didn't put a hand on my forehead. She just stared. And then her shoulders dropped. The tension left her body. She let out a long, shuddering breath. It wasn't a sigh of grief. It was a sigh of relief so profound it shook her frame. She straightened up. A slow smile spread across her face, transforming her features from feigned concern to predatory triumph. It was a smile I had never seen before, a smile that stripped. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She didn't dial 911. Not yet. She dialed a number I knew by heart. "It is over," she said into the phone, her voice low and excited. "He is cold. It looks like he struggled for the pills. It is perfect. Get the cremation paperwork ready. We are celebrating tonight." She hung up the phone. She looked at me one last time, a look of utter contempt. "Goodbye, old man," she said softly. Then she took a deep breath, threw her head back, and let out a scream that was so loud, so piercing, so perfectly theatrical that it would have shattered glass. "No, Garrison, wake up! Oh God, someone help me!" She ran out of the room, her heels clattering on the floor, continuing to scream as she ran down the stairs, putting on the performance of a lifetime for the maids who would be arriving any minute. I lay there in the silence, and inside my mind, where the fire still burned hot and bright, I made her a promise. Scream while you can, Beatrice, because the next time you scream, it won't be an act. I heard the distant wail of sirens approaching. My team, the cavalry. The first act was over. I had died. Now I just had to wait to be reborn. The stage was set for the funeral, and I intended to be the most ungracious guest of honor in history. The sirens grew louder, a wailing symphony that pierced through the fog of the beta blocker. To anyone else, it was the sound of emergency, of chaos, of help arriving too late. To me, trapped inside my own frozen chest, it was the sound of a plan executing with mechanical precision. I lay rigid. Beatrice was still screaming in the hallway, a looping track of theatrical despair that I knew was designed for the benefit of the house staff who were just arriving for their morning shift. I heard the heavy tread of boots on the stairs. Not the frantic scramble of municipal paramedics trying to save a life, but the measured, heavy steps of men who knew exactly what they were walking into. The door to the guest room burst open. "Ma'am, step back," a voice commanded. It was Miller. I recognized the raspy baritone even through the haze of the drugs. Beatrice rushed back into the room, throwing herself onto my legs. "Oh God, he isn't moving. He is cold. Please, you have to do something. Save him." I felt hands on me. Professional hands. They touched my neck, checking the carotid. They placed a stethoscope against my chest. I focused on the darkness. Slow. Be slow. Be not thump. Silence. 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 Thump. "There is no pulse," Miller announced, his voice flat. "No respiration. Pupils are fixed and dilated." "He is gone," Beatrice wailed, her voice cracking perfectly. "Don't tell me he is gone." "Start CPR," another voice said. It was part of the show. They had to make it look good. I felt the pressure on my chest, the rhythmic compressions. They were firm, but I knew Miller was pulling his punches. He wasn't trying to crack my ribs. He was trying to sell a narrative. 1, 2, 3, 4. Beatrice sobbed in the background, a noise that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "Stop," Miller said after a minute. "It is no use. He has been down too long. Rigor is already setting in." He called it. Time of death 8:42 a.m. The room went silent save for Beatrice's jagged breathing. She was good. He had a heart condition. We knew this might happen, but I didn't think it would be so soon. "I need you to step out, ma'am, while we prepare him for transport," Miller said gently. "The coroner is on his way to sign off." "I can't leave him," Beatrice cried, grabbing my cold, limp hand. "My poor Garrison. Please, ma'am. It is protocol." I felt her hand squeeze mine one last time. It wasn't a squeeze of affection. It was a squeeze of ownership. It was a victory lap. She released me and I heard her heels retreating into the hallway. As soon as the door clicked shut, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The frantic energy of the emergency evaporated, replaced by the cool efficiency of a tactical operation. "Is he stable?" someone whispered. "Pulse is thready but rhythmic," Miller replied, his voice barely audible. "He is in the zone. Let's get him bagged before she comes back." I felt them lifting me. The sensation, they shifted me onto a backboard, then onto the gurney. The movement jostled the remaining fluid in my inner ear, making the room tilt wildly, but I couldn't flinch. I was a statue carved from ice. Then came the sound of the zipper, the heavy plastic sound of the body bag being closed. Darkness swallowed me completely. The air inside the bag was stale and smelled of vinyl. This was the part that broke most people, Blackwood had warned me. The sensory deprivation, the feeling of being discarded. But I found a strange comfort in it. It was a cocoon. I was the caterpillar dissolving into soup, waiting to emerge as something with teeth. I felt the gurney rolling, the bump of the threshold, the smooth glide of the hallway floor. I heard muffled voices as we passed the landing. Beatrice was speaking to someone. I strained my ears against the plastic. "Thank you for coming," the grieving widow pulling herself together for the sake of duty. "I am terribly sorry, Mrs. Vance," the sheriff's voice boomed. He was a pillar of the community. It was his heart, Beatrice said. He didn't want an autopsy. He made me promise. He hated hospitals. He wanted to be cremated immediately. He had a phobia of decaying. She was selling the script Miller had forged. She was improvising, adding details to make the lie more convincing. A phobia of decaying. It was brilliant. It explained the rush. It explained the cremation order. "I have the paperwork right here," the sheriff said. "Since he was under a doctor's care for the condition and you have the pre-signed authorization, we can release the body directly to the funeral home of your choice." "Sunrise Crematorium," Beatrice said quickly. Too quickly. They are expecting him." I called them. I was feet away from the woman who murdered me, separated only by a layer of black vinyl. "I just need your signature here, Mrs. Vance," the sheriff said, confirming the identity of the deceased and authorizing the transport. I heard the scratch of a pen on paper. I imagined her hand. Was it shaking? Was she trembling with the adrenaline of the kill? Or was she steady, her mind already calculating how to spend the $60 million she thought she was inheriting? "There," she said. "Is that it? Is he legally dead?" "He is, ma'am. The county recognizes Garrison Vance as deceased." "Thank you," she whispered. "Take him away. Please. I can't bear to look at the bag." We started moving again. The wheels rumbled over the marble foyer. The front door opened, and a blast of fresh morning air hit the bag, cooling the plastic against my face. We were outside. The doors slammed shut, sealing out the world, sealing out Beatrice, sealing out the life of Garrison Vance. The engine roared to life. The siren wailed once, a short burst to clear the driveway, and then we were moving. We drove for 10 minutes in silence. I counted the turns, left out of the estate, right onto the main road. We were heading away from the city towards the safe house. "Okay," Miller's voice said from right beside my head. "We are clear." The zipper hissed open. Light flooded in blindingly bright after the darkness of the bag. I blinked, my eyes watering, but my body refused to move. The paralysis was still absolute. Miller leaned over me. His face was grim. He checked the monitor. "Heart rate is 32. We need to wake him up." He injected something into my IV line, a reversal agent. It hit me like a kick to the chest. It began to gallop, racing to catch up with the oxygen demand. I gasped a ragged, tearing sound as my lungs expanded fully for the first time in hours. My back arched off the gurney involuntarily. "Easy, Mr. Vance," Miller said, holding my shoulders down. "Breathe. Just breathe." I choked, coughing violently. Sensation rushed back into my limbs, pins and needles, 1,000 stinging ants crawling under my skin. I tried to lift my hand. It was heavy, clumsy, but it moved. I touched my face. The silicone was still there, cold and rubbery. Did she sign it? I rasped, my voice sounding like it had been dragged through gravel. Miller held up a clipboard. On it was the death certificate and the cremation authorization. At the bottom in blue ink was the signature, Beatrice Vance. She was practically vibrating. She didn't even look at the bag as we rolled you past. She was looking at her phone. She was texting someone. "Dominic," I whispered. She was telling Dominic they won. I lay back against the pillow, the adrenaline crash leaving me weak but euphoric. I was alive. I was legally dead, but I was alive. And I had the paper trail. I had the forged will she tried to pass. I had the cremation order she signed to destroy the evidence. "Take me to the safe house," I said, closing my eyes. "I need to get this paint off my face. And I need a suit. A white suit." "Why white?" Miller asked, checking my pulse. "Because," I said, a smile cracking the stiff makeup on my face. "Angels wear white. And I am coming back as her avenging angel." The ambulance sped up. I lay there listening to the hum of it was the steady driving rhythm of a hunter closing in on his prey. Beatrice had signed her name on the dotted line. She thought it was my death warrant. She didn't know it was her own confession. I sat in the high-back aeronautical chair of my panic room, the leather cool against my skin, surrounded by the hum of cooling fans and the soft electric blue glow of a wall of monitors. It was a fortress of solitude buried 20 feet beneath the foundation of the home I had built, a concrete bunker designed to withstand a nuclear fallout or a corporate siege. Today, however, it served a different purpose. It was the private box for the most expensive and exclusive theater production in Chicago. The screens before me flickered with high-definition feeds from every corner of the estate. But my attention was fixed on the center monitor, the one broadcasting the Beatrice had turned my sanctuary into a funeral parlor in less than 72 hours. Heavy black velvet drapes had been hung over the floor-to-ceiling windows, blocking out the summer sun and casting the room in a somber, artificial twilight. The air, even filtered through the digital feed, seemed thick and suffocating. I could almost smell the lilies, hundreds of them. Great white funereal trumpets jammed into every available vase and corner. Beatrice knew I detested lilies. I had told her once that they smelled of decay and old perfume. Filling the room with them wasn't an oversight. It was a final, fragrant insult, a way of marking her territory over my memory. In the center of the room, resting on a silver bier that looked like it had been rented from a prop house, was the casket. It was a magnificent thing. Beatrice had been adamant about that, with the guests citing my desire to be remembered as I was in life. A convenient lie that saved her the trouble of explaining why my corpse wasn't currently decomposing inside it. The box was empty, save for 100 pounds of sandbags Miller had loaded in to give it the requisite gravitas. When the pallbearers, my golf partner's men I had known for 30 years, lifted it later. I watched as the guests began to filter in. It was a who's who of Chicago's elite. Real estate developers, city council members, charity board directors. People who had shaken my hand, drunk my wine, and envied my success. They moved in a hushed, respectful herd, speaking in low tones that the sensitive microphones picked up with crystal clarity. "I can't believe it happened so fast," I heard Jonathan, my competitor in the logistics sector, whisper. "Heart failure is a silent killer," his wife replied, adjusting her pearls. "Beatrice is devastated. Look at her." I adjusted the camera angle, zooming in on the star of the show. Beatrice stood near the head of the casket, a tragic figure in black. She had chosen her wardrobe with the precision of a tactician. The dress was a vintage Givenchy, tasteful, modest, yet cut just close enough to remind everyone that she was still young, still beautiful, and now very available. A black veil of delicate lace covered her face, obscuring her eyes, but allowing the world to see the tremble of her chin. She dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, accepting condolences with a grace that would have made a seasoned actress jealous. "Thank you for coming," she murmured to the deputy mayor, clasping his hands in hers. "Garrison admired you so much," but in the polite fiction of a funeral, truth was the first casualty. Hovering near the bar, playing the role of the stoic family friend, was Dominic. He had traded his tight t-shirts for a charcoal suit that I realized with a jolt of cold fury was one of mine. It was a bespoke Italian cut I had bought in Milan 3 years ago. He had tailored it, taken it in at the shoulders, but I recognized the fabric. He was wearing a dead man's clothes to his funeral. He poured drinks with a solemn gravity, nodding sympathetically, as people spoke to him, probably assuming he was a nephew or a distant cousin. "He catches the eye, doesn't he?" I heard one of Beatrice's socialite friends whisper. "Such a comfort to her in this difficult time." I watched Dominic's eyes. They weren't sad. They were darting around the room, assessing the well. It wasn't a look of shared grief. It was a look of shared conspiracy, a subtle electric current of anticipation. They were two wolves in sheep's clothing, struggling to contain their excitement at the feast before them. The room filled up. My lawyer, Arthur Blackwood, stood by the fireplace, looking grim and imposing. The sheriff was there too, in plain clothes, blending into the crowd, his eyes scanning the exits, not for threats, but for the signal. They were the only two people in that room, besides me, who knew that the man in the box was a bag of sand. I watched Beatrice move through the crowd. She was working the room, cementing her narrative. "He didn't want a long illness," she told my former secretary, a woman who had been loyal to me for 20 years and was genuinely weeping. "He wanted to go quickly, and he made me promise no fuss. If anyone asked later why there wasn't a grave, why there wasn't a monument, she would have her story ready. It was his wish. Who could argue with the wishes of the dead?" I took a sip of water, my throat dry despite the cool air of the panic room. It was a surreal, out-of-body experience to witness my own erasure. I saw people moving on, discussing the void I would leave in the market, speculating on who would take over my board seats. I was already past tense to them. A memory, a legacy to be carved up and consumed. But amidst the murmur of voices, I caught something else. A conversation near the hors d'oeuvres table. "She seems remarkably composed, isn't she?" It was the wife of my banker. "I mean, it has been 3 days. Shock," her husband replied. "Or maybe relief. He was older, you know." Relief. Beatrice had played the devoted young wife perfectly, but she had also cultivated the image of the caretaker, the burden bearer. Now she was the liberated widow. Suddenly, Beatrice tapped a silver spoon against a crystal flute of champagne. The sharp, clear chime cut through the low rumble of conversation. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. She lowered the veil, revealing a face that was perfectly made up to look pale and drawn. She took a deep, shuddering breath, looking around the room as if gathering strength. "Friends, colleagues, loved ones," she began, her voice trembling, just enough to be convincing, without being unintelligible. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Garrison." Garrison was a man of precision. He didn't like to wait. And even in this, his final journey, he didn't want a long service. She continued, her hand resting lightly on the lid of the casket. "He wanted us to celebrate his life, not mourn his death. He wanted us to drink his wine, tell stories, and move forward. That was his way. Forward. Always forward." She paused, wiping a non-existent tear. "But before we say our final goodbyes and send him to his rest, there is one piece of business he insisted on." Garrison was always worried about the future. He wanted to make sure that in the event of this, that everything was settled immediately. He didn't want probate. He didn't want uncertainty. She gestured to Arthur Blackwood. "So he asked his attorney to read his last will and testament here today in front of all of you. He wanted you to know that he took care of us, that he took care of me." I leaned forward in my chair, my eyes locked on the screen. She was doing this to cement her ownership in front of witnesses. She wanted the world to see her crowned as the queen of my empire. She wanted the validation of my peers. Arthur stepped forward. He held a thick manila envelope in his hands. He looked tired, his face lined with a gravity that went beyond the somber occasion. He walked to the center of the room, standing next to the empty casket. He looked at Beatrice. She smiled at him, a small, encouraging, triumphant smile. She thought she knew what was in that envelope. She thought it was the forgery she and her pet lawyer had drafted, the one that left the entire estate, the stocks, the properties, and the custody of everything to her. She had no idea that Arthur had switched the envelopes 5 minutes ago in the hall. My finger hovered over the button that would activate the main television screen in the living room. The massive 85-inch display mounted above the fireplace, currently dark and silent. The stage was set. The audience was captive. The villain had made her speech. It was time for the plot twist. I watched Arthur open the seal of the envelope. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the silence of the room. He pulled out a document. But instead of reading it, he looked up. He looked directly at the camera hidden in the molding, looking straight at me, though no one else knew it. Then he looked at Beatrice. "Actually, Mrs. Vance," Arthur said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "Before I read this, I think there is a misunderstanding we need to clear up regarding the timeline of this document." Beatrice's smile faltered. Arthur said, holding the paper up to the light, "that this document isn't the will you sent over to my office yesterday." The air in the room changed. It went from somber to electric. The guests sensed the shift. The polite veneer was cracking. Beatrice took a step forward, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "I don't understand. Garrison wrote that will years ago." No, Arthur corrected her. "This is the living will and testament of Garrison Vance, and it is dated 4 days ago." Beatrice laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound that grated on the ears. "That is impossible. 4 days ago, Garrison was sick. He was incapacitated. He couldn't have signed anything." Arthur didn't answer. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a remote control. The black void was replaced by a static hiss, and then a clear, high-definition image resolved itself. It wasn't a document. It wasn't a pre-recorded message. It was a live feed. It was me. Sitting in the panic room wearing a pristine white tuxedo, holding a glass of milk. I looked into the camera lens, staring directly into the soul of the woman standing above me. "Hello, Beatrice," I said into the microphone. And the scream that died in her throat was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The room was heavy with the silence of anticipation, the kind that precedes the reading of a will, where millions are at stake. I watched from the bunker, my hand hovering over the control console, as Beatrice dabbed at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. She was the picture of the guests, my business rivals, the city council members, the socialites who had come to be seen were all leaning forward, eager to witness the transfer of the Vance empire. Arthur Blackwood stood at the head of the room, holding the thick manila envelope. He looked tired, his face lined with a gravity that went beyond the somber occasion. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the stillness. Before we proceed with the reading of the last will and testament, Arthur said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, there is a matter of provenance we must address. Mrs. Vance provided my office with a document yesterday, a will she claims was drafted by her late husband in his final days. Beatrice nodded, a sad, brave smile touching her lips. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of, she murmured, her voice trembling just enough to... Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sleek black remote control. He held it up, letting the light catch the matte surface. However, Arthur continued, his tone hardening, my client left specific instructions regarding this moment. He was a man who believed in transparency. He believed that the truth should always be seen, not just heard. Beatrice frowned, a flicker of confusion marring her perfect composure. Mr. Blackwood, I don't understand. Can't we just read the document? These people are grieving. Grief can wait for the truth, Mrs. Vance, Arthur said. He pointed the remote at the massive 85-inch television screen mounted above the fireplace, the screen Beatrice usually used to watch reality shows while drinking my wine. I pressed the button on my console at the exact same moment Arthur pressed his. The screen in the living room flickered. The black void was replaced by a static, then a clear, high-definition image resolved itself. It wasn't a pre-recorded legal statement. It wasn't a montage of my life's achievements. It was a live feed from 3 nights ago. The timestamp in the corner of the screen read 2:14 a.m. The location was the master bedroom, the room directly above where the guests were currently sitting. The image was crisp, the night vision mode turning everything into shades of ghostly green and gray. The room erupted in gasps. Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth. Dominic took a step back, nearly knocking over a vase of lilies. On the screen, Beatrice and Dominic were in bed. My bed. They were tangled together in the sheets, laughing. It wasn't a scene of intimacy. It was a scene of triumph. Look at this, the Beatrice on the screen said, her voice tinny but distinct through the television speakers. The old fool never changed the combination. It was his birthday. How pathetic is that? He is pathetic, Dominic's voice replied, deep and mocking. But he is rich, or at least he was. How long until the digoxin finishes him off? The air in the living room was sucked out instantly. The guests froze. My business partner, a man who had known me for 30 years, stood up, his face pale. The deputy mayor dropped his drink, the glass shattering on the hardwood floor, but no one looked down. All eyes were glued to the screen. Beatrice laughed. The recording continued. Another dose in his milk tonight should do it. His heart is already fluttering like a dying bird. By tomorrow morning I will be a widow, and you, my love, will be the CEO of Vance. What if he talks? Leo, Beatrice scoffed, taking a sip of her champagne. Who is going to believe a traumatized 8-year-old? Besides, the papers are signed. He goes to the state orphanage the minute the coroner zips the body bag. I am not raising another woman's mistake. In the living room, Beatrice let out a strangled cry. Turn it off, she shrieked, lunging toward Arthur. It's fake, it's deep fake, someone made this up. Arthur didn't move. He simply sidestepped her, his expression one of absolute disgust. The sheriff, who had been blending into the crowd near the exit, stepped forward, blocking Beatrice's path to the television. Sit down, Mrs. Vance, the sheriff said, his voice low and dangerous. The video cut to a new scene. This one was from the kitchen, recorded just yesterday morning. Beatrice was on the phone with the I need that medical report to say he had chronic heart failure. I need the cremation order signed now. If anyone does an autopsy, they will find the poison. Do you understand me? I am paying you $50,000 to make sure my husband turns into ash before anyone asks questions. The gasps in the room turned into a murmur of horror. People were backing away from Beatrice and Dominic as if they were contagious. Dominic looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting to the patio doors, looking for an escape route. But the doors were locked. I had engaged the magnetic seals from the panic room 5 minutes ago. "This is insane," Dominic yelled, his voice cracking. "I didn't do anything. She is the one, she did it all." "Shut up," Beatrice screamed at him. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You coward. You helped me mix it. You helped me plan it. Ladies, now I would like to show you the present." He pointed the remote again. The screen flickered. The recording of the bedroom vanished. It was replaced by a new image, a live feed. It showed a small, sterile room with concrete walls. A panic room. Sitting in the center of the frame in a high-back leather chair wearing a pristine white tuxedo and holding a glass of milk was me. I looked directly into the camera lens. I wasn't wearing makeup anymore. The gray pallor was gone. My eyes were sharp, clear, and burning with a fire that terrified them. "Hello, Beatrice," I said into the microphone. My voice boomed through the surround sound speakers of the living room, surrounding them, crushing them. Beatrice spun around, looking at the screen, then at the casket, then back at the screen. Her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the floor, her black dress pooling around her like an oil slick. "You were cold." I took a slow, deliberate sip of the milk. "This milk tastes a little bitter, darling," I said, my voice smooth and deadly. "Did you put extra love in it this time, or did you just run out of poison?" "It's a ghost," Dominic stammered, backing away until he hit the wall. "It's a recording. It has to be." "Is it?" I asked. "Arthur, would you mind telling Dominic that his tie is crooked? It is disrespectful to wear a crooked tie to a funeral, especially when it is a suit you stole from my closet." Arthur turned to Dominic. "Fix your tie, son." Dominic's hands flew to his neck, trembling violently. The room watched in stunned silence. This wasn't a recording. I was watching them. I was there. I stood up in the video feed. I walked toward the camera until my face filled the screen. "You wanted a funeral, Beatrice," I said. "Well, here is your show. But you forgot one thing. You forgot who built this house. You forgot who built this life. You thought I was just an old man you could discard like trash." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. "I am not the victim here, Beatrice. I am the judge. I am the jury. And right now I am the executioner of your lifestyle." I turned away from the camera. On the screen they saw me walk toward a heavy steel door. I placed my hand on the biometric scanner. The light turned green. The heavy bolts retracted with a loud mechanical clank that echoed through the speakers. I pushed the door open. In the living room, all heads turned toward the hallway. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Slow, deliberate. The steps of a man who owned the ground he walked on. The door to the living room swung open. I didn't look at Arthur. I walked straight to the center of the room, to the space between the casket and my wife. The silence was absolute. Not a breath. Not a movement. I looked down at Beatrice huddled on the floor. She looked up at me, her face a ruin of mascara and terror. She reached out a hand, grasping for the hem of my trousers. "Garrison," she sobbed. "Please, I can explain. It was him. He forced me. He said he would kill me if I didn't help him." I looked at Dominic. He was shaking his head, sweat pouring down his face. "She is lying. It was her idea. She bought the digoxin online. She has the search history on her laptop." I looked back at Beatrice. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel betrayal. I felt nothing but cold, clinical detachment. She was a bad investment I was writing off. "Get up," I said softly. She scrambled to her feet, hope flickering in her. Beatrice flinched, expecting a weapon. But I pulled out a single folded piece of paper. "This is the transfer order for the $5 million you sent to the Cayman Islands," I said, holding it up for the room to see. "And this," I pointed to the sheriff, who stepped forward and handed me a thick file. "Is the adoption paperwork for Leo? The paperwork you signed to send him to hell?" I tore the papers in half, then in half again. I let the pieces flutter to the floor like confetti. "You are not my wife, Beatrice. You are a thief. You are a murderer in training, and you are trespassing." I nodded to the sheriff. "Take them." The spell broke. Pandemonium erupted. The sheriff signaled, and 4 uniformed officers burst into the room from the kitchen entrance. 2 of them grabbed Dominic, who tried to run but tripped over his own feet. The other 2 went for Beatrice. It was a raw animal sound of a creature caught in a trap. "No. You can't do this. And Mrs. Vance, I own half of everything. Garrison, help me." As they dragged her away, kicking and screaming, her heels leaving scuff marks on the floor, I turned my back on her. I looked at the casket. I looked at the lilies. I looked at the faces of the people who had come to bury me. "I apologize for the theatrics," I said to the room, adjusting my cuffs. "But my wife insisted on a funeral. I just wanted to make sure it was the right one." I walked over to the bar, where Dominic had abandoned a bottle of my best scotch. I poured a glass. I took a sip. It tasted like victory. I stepped across the threshold, the heels of my shoes clicking rhythmically against the marble floor, a sound that echoed like a ticking clock in the sudden vacuum of the room. I was no longer the digital image on the screen above the fireplace. I was flesh and blood, standing 10 feet away from the woman who had signed my death certificate just hours ago. The pristine white tuxedo I wore seemed to absorb the dim light of the room, making me look spectral, an apparition that had refused to fade. Beatrice was still on the floor, her legs having failed her moments ago. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, the pupils dilated in absolute primal terror. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out, just a dry, rattling breath. She was looking at a dead man walking. She was looking at her own guilt manifesting in physical form. "You look like you have seen a ghost." "Beatrice," I said, my voice calm, conversational, devoid of the frailty I had feigned for months. "But ghosts do not cast shadows, and ghosts do not sign checks." She shook her head violently, her hands coming up to cover her face as if she could block out the reality of my existence. "No," she whimpered. "It is not real. It is the stress. I am hallucinating. You are cold. You were cold." I walked past her, ignoring her plea for insanity. My focus shifted to Dominic. He was standing by the bar, frozen, his face a mask of sweat and panic. In his hand he still clutched a glass of my 30-year-old single malt scotch. He looked ridiculous in my suit, the fabric straining across his shoulders, a cheap imitation of the man he tried to replace. He looked at me, then at the patio doors which were locked, then back at me. He was a rat, realizing the maze had, but in that moment he shrank. He withered under the weight of my stare. "That is a fine scotch, Dominic," I said, reaching out. My hand was steady. His was trembling so hard the ice cube clattered against the crystal. I took the glass from his grip. He let it go without a fight. I held it up to the light, inspecting the amber liquid. "You wear my clothes. You sleep in my house. You drink my liquor. You even thought you could take my wife and my life. But you forgot one fundamental rule of business, Dominic. Never celebrate until the deal is closed." With a flick of my wrist, I splashed the contents of the glass directly into his face. The alcohol burned his eyes. He sputtered, gasping, wiping at his face, stumbling back against the bar cart. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath at the violence of the gesture. It wasn't. I slammed the empty glass down on the table, the sound like a gunshot. "Now about the money," I said, turning back to the room, my voice booming. I reached into the inner pocket of my tuxedo and pulled out a single crisp document. It was stamped with the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Beatrice, you were so proud of yourself this morning. You moved $5 million from our joint account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. New Horizons, LLC. You thought you were clever. You thought you had secured your future. Beatrice lowered her hands, looking at me with tear-streaked confusion. "It is my money," she shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "I am your wife. It is marital property." I smiled, a cold, shark-like baring of teeth. "That is where you are wrong. You see, 6 months ago, I knew then that you were planning an exit strategy, so I prepared one for you." I held up the document. "The account you drained this morning, the one with the $5 million, that wasn't my retirement fund, Viotra. That was a honeypot." The room went deadly silent. Even Dominic stopped wiping his face to listen. "I worked with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division to set up that account." I continued, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "The money inside it was marked. Every single digital cent was tagged with a tracking algorithm. It was bait. And you swallowed it whole." Beatrice's face went from pale to a sickly gray. "When you transferred that money to Dominic's shell company, you didn't just commit theft. You didn't just commit wire fraud. You triggered a federal tripwire. You unknowingly laundered money it belongs to the United States government as evidence of a conspiracy to commit murder and international money laundering." I tossed the document onto her lap. "You thought you were stealing a fortune, Beatrice? Instead, you just signed a confession that carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. And Dominic, since he is the registered agent of the company that received the stolen federal funds, he is looking at the same time." Dominic's legs gave out. He slid down the front of the bar, collapsing into a heap. Beatrice stared at the paper in her lap, her hands shaking too hard to even pick it up. The realization washed over her. The money wasn't her escape. It was her cage. I looked around the room at the stunned guests. "I suggest you all check your pockets," I said dryly. "Because if these two would steal marked bills from the FBI..." 4 uniformed officers stormed into the room from the kitchen entrance, their boots heavy on the marble floor. 2 of them grabbed Dominic, who tried to scramble over the bar cart in a pathetic attempt to flee, sending crystal decanters crashing to the ground. The other 2 flanked Beatrice, gripping her arms with a firmness that left no room for argument. "It was him," Beatrice shrieked, her voice tearing through the room like a jagged knife. "He forced me. He said he would hurt me if I didn't help him. I am a victim here. Garrison, tell them I love you." I stood motionless, watching the woman who had shared my bed for 10 years unravel into a mess of mascara and desperation. Dominic, realizing his escape was impossible, turned on her with the viciousness of a cornered rat. "She is lying," he roared, struggling against the cuffs. "It was her idea. She bought the poison." "That is right," Dominic spat, looking at her with pure hatred. "I recorded every phone call, Beatrice. I knew you would try to frame me. I have you on tape ordering the digoxin. I have you on tape laughing about killing the old man." Beatrice let out a primal scream and lunged at him, her fingernails aiming for his eyes. The officers held her back, but she kicked and thrashed, spitting obscenities that made the high society guests recoil in disgust. There was no elegance left, no carefully crafted facade. Just 2 greedy criminals tearing each other apart in the ruins of their failed coup. "Get them out of my sight," I said quietly. The officers dragged them toward the door. Beatrice looked back at me one last time, her eyes wild, pleading, terrified. But she found no mercy in my gaze. I turned my back on her as they were hauled into the awaiting squad cars. Their shouts, the guests murmuring and shaken, filed out, leaving Arthur and the sheriff to handle the cleanup. I walked out to the front porch, the evening air cool and clean against my face. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. Leo was sitting on the steps, waiting. He looked up as I approached, his eyes wide and uncertain. "Is it over, Dad?" he whispered. I sat down beside him and pulled him into a tight embrace. I felt the tension leave his small body as he buried his face in my chest. "It is over, son," I promised, kissing the top of his head. "The bad people are gone. They are never coming back." We sat there for a long time watching the last of the police cars disappear down the long driveway. The silence that settled over the estate wasn't heavy or oppressive anymore. It was peaceful. It was the I think we need a change of scenery, Leo, I said, handing him the envelope. He opened it, pulling out 2 first-class tickets. He looked at the destination, his eyes lighting up. Hawaii. He asked, a slow smile spreading across his face. Hawaii, I confirmed. No business. No conferences. Just you, me, the beach, and as much ice cream as you can eat. We are going to build sandcastles, Leo, and we are going to build a new life. He hugged me again, harder this time. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son, I said, looking out at the horizon. For the first time in years, I didn't have to look over my shoulder. I didn't have to wonder if my drink was poisoned or if my smiles were fake. I had my son. I had my life. And I had the truth. I spent my life building a fortress of wealth, believing it would protect my family, only to realize I had invited the wolves inside myself. True legacy isn't the money you leave behind. It's the children you protect and the values you instill. Betrayal burns, but it also clarifies. It strips away the fake smiles and shows you who really matters. I lost a wife, but I saved my son, and in the end, that is the only profit that truly counts. If you enjoyed seeing justice served ice cold, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of retribution. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Beatrice?